Hi, loves, and welcome to the With Love Always podcast, a podcast to help you live the life you were created for. We are your hosts and your friends, Bree
and Marissa,
and we're so grateful you're here.
We pray you listen and leave feeling more inspired, encouraged, and uplifted.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode. We are so grateful as always that you are tuning in to this conversation and tuning into our friendship today. For today's episode, we are going to be talking about the art of slowing down. I know I can speak on behalf of myself and Marissa. We live a life that feels like it's going nonstop. There's moments in our life when it feels like our capacity is worn so thin, when we are on the brink of burnout, when we feel like our schedule is so full. And something I've been finding myself say a lot is like, I feel as if my time is not even in my own hands. And that is a tough place to be in. And I'm confident that if you're tuning into this episode, maybe perhaps you're feeling the same. And today we want to encourage, inspire, as well as minister to our own hearts in the midst of our own limited capacity of how important it is to slow down, regardless of schedule, regardless of responsibility, regardless of obligation and the demands of this life and of this world. There are still opportunities in our life to pursue moments of stillness that might not come natural, but are so necessary for our own well-being. And so, like always, this episode is inspired by our own struggles and by something that we need to take our own advice in. And we pray that in the process of encouraging and speaking on this topic today, that we encourage ourselves in the midst of it. Yeah. So with all that's to say, the art of slowing down, let's get into it.
And we want this episode to be just so practical and tangible for whatever season you're in. Like, I picture the super busy mom with like little kids that's working a job. Like, we want to make this so accessible, and we're going to get into 5 like very practical ways that no matter what season you're in, you can try to kind of invite these things into your life, and it can allow you to physically and just kind of mentally slow down. And so we want to kind of start it off with just some of the reasons why we feel like slowness is so important and how it's so much more than just sitting and being still. Like, there's such an intentionality to it. And I think something I've just been reminded of recently is just how passionate God is about getting us to slow down so that we truly can be present, not only to ourselves and how we're doing, but also to those around us, and even just present to Him and like fully aware. And so I think it's one of those things, like, if we do not allow ourselves to slow down, God will provide a very clear invitation for us too. And so we just so want to give you guys a sense of freedom and peace, and just really practical ways that you can invite more slowness, more savoring into your day-to-day already busy life. So starting with what I always love to start with, which is a little bit of a definition, just some kind of framework for this conversation. And I think sometimes when people hear the word slowness, it can almost have this connotation of like inefficiency or like laziness, or you're not really doing anything. Or that you even just have to have this like very unrealistic, empty schedule where suddenly you're like not working a full-time job. And I just kind of want to surrender like our preconceptions of what slowness is, and instead just kind of invite a new perspective and a new framework of like, slowness actually can be the most productive thing that we can do in our lives. And I know that's something we've talked about, of like, sometimes doing less can actually be doing so much more. It's just that what we're saying yes to has more meaning and it has more impact. And so when I think of slowness, the words that kind of come to mind are just being present, being unhurried, being super intentional with what you're saying yes to and how you're spending your time, being observant and in touch with the world around you. And also, I think a really important part of slowness is just being kind, which might seem kind of silly, but I just think of the verse like, love is patient, and the fact that the descriptor of love in the Bible, the first word that's used is patience, because I think the most loving thing we can do is sit and be fully present with someone. Like, the key to love is how aware and present we are, where we're like fully engaged in that conversation. We're fully listening. We're responsive. We're giving to that person. And so I think that carries over into any other area of our life of like, if we can slow down, if we can have patience and grace, and we can just be so present, we actually can be so much more loving to ourselves, but also to those around us.
I love that so much because I think I was just mentioning this to you literally when I walked in earlier I can always tell when my capacity is worn so thin and I'm like holding on to tension in my body or holding on to anxiousness and I'm not providing space for me to slow down and really rest my mind. And to what you said, truly like slowness does not equate to inefficiency, does not equate to not being productive. Like we are very well aware that slowness is not always the most practical thing. Like it's not always the thing that comes easy or comes natural. And that's why we're prompting this conversation, because reality is we all pursue and live a life that we probably can't slow down. Like there are responsibilities that are required of us. There's ways that we have to show up in this world. There's demands and needs that are pulling and drawing our attention at any given moment. And a lot of those are necessary and things that we can't remove completely. But even in the midst of that, I think even just to what you said, I can see when the demands of this world, of my life, of my work, of whatever it may be, is stripping me from being present with loving other people. And that in turn makes me less present with loving myself, loving God. And it's just like a domino effect. And I even have like such a practical example of me realizing how much I need to pursue moments of slowness versus allowing one area of my life to accelerate and speed up every other area of my life, which is causing me to feel disconnected from myself, is when I can see myself talking to people and I'm like checked out. Or like I cannot be engaged, I cannot ask the questions, I cannot show up for that person because all I'm thinking about is the anxieties in my head. And given that is a normal human experience, we're all going to feel that. There's going to be fluctuations of that, and that's normal. And we're here to validate that it's okay if you're in that season. But for me, that was my clear indicator, literally just as of yesterday, that, whoa, do I need to put to practice these things in my life to be sure and confident that I'm still finding slowness and rest for my mind, because I never want to be in a place where I'm allowing the responsibilities of life to disrupt my ultimate purpose in this world, which is to love and to show up in love in all areas of my life. And our heart with this episode today is to allow you permission to, one, to feel maybe disconnected in this moment, but also two, to find and put in your toolbox a new piece of equipment that will really allow you to take on headstrong how busy your life may be, while also being intentional and pursuing the little moments and little glimpses of where you can slow down.
Yeah, that is so good. And I think something about slowness is like a lot of times, I know at least for myself, we can almost push it away of like, I'll have slowness in my life once work slows down, or once like things with family situations get better, once this thing happens that I'm working towards. And I think what we so want to invite today is like, slowness is such an active choice. It's separate from our busy schedules.
Yeah.
Yes, there is correlation. And I think there are seasons where there's less slowness than we probably need. But I think we just want to just invite that perspective of slowness is something you can actively insert and honestly probably need to insert into your day-to-day life in order to make sure that you are operating from your best place and state so that you can continue to show up and do the best you can in every other area of your life that you're called to. And a quote that I found, I think it was just in a book, it's by John Ortberg, and he said, "Hurry is not just a disordered schedule, it's a disordered heart." And that was so convicting when I read that, because I think it's easy to just blame our schedule or blame our calendar or all of our commitments. And I think we have to first look internally and evaluate why are we committing to all of these things? Why are we in such a state where our capacity is beyond what we feel like we're capable of? Why do we feel like it's so hard to slow down? And I think in that reflection, we begin to then have clarity of like, maybe I need to make some changes, like in a physical sense, or maybe here's what I say yes to. And I think that could be a whole conversation in and of itself and much deeper than we'll probably get into today. I know we just want to keep it a little more practical with some tips, but I do want to still encourage you guys to kind of think over that quote, just because I know it was so impactful for me. Mm-hmm. And even it just gave me the freedom to say, like, it's actually okay and necessary to slow down and to say no to things and to actually prioritize this. This is probably one of the most productive and proactive things that I can do in my life.
That's so good. I think something I was thinking about, and I don't know if anyone listening would maybe think this upon listening to this episode even so far, seeing this title, but you might just be thinking like, oh, this is just not for me. Like to what Marissa just said, it's like, I live too busy of a life. I can't slow down. Like that's just not for me. But it's so independent of that. Like, and it's a necessity for all of us. And it's truly just an evaluation of yourself of like, why aren't you giving yourself permission to be a human and to slow down? Because you do not have infinite capacity. You do not have infinite capability. You are not meant to be sitting in the presence of people checked out and thinking about your to-do list. That is not your ultimate design. And if you've been operating from that place for a long time, I want to just say I'm so sorry, because I know what that feels like and it is exhausting. But I promise there is a return to self that you are deserving of, and I'm deserving of, that Marissa's deserving of. And we're just so excited to get into these 5 things. And like I said, literally encourage our hearts in the process, because I need this so bad.
Yes. And I love that you said the word deserving. I think first, as we get into this, it's like, we need to first give ourselves permission to do these things of like, you deserve to feel like you're operating within your capacity. So that kind of leads us to point number 1, which again might seem obvious, but it is to quit something. And something I'm trying to embrace is, I think we live in FOMO culture. I think social media really pushes that, where it's so easy to see everything that people are doing. And we almost want to say yes to something, because if not, we're going to have to watch it via Instagram afterwards and kind of feel bummed that we didn't get to be a part of it. But something I'm trying to, like a phrase I've been saying in my mind is like, embrace the joy of missing out. Like when I say no to this thing, or when I choose to eliminate this thing in my life, there's actually so much joy, because it's not just I'm losing this opportunity. It's actually, I'm getting something. I'm getting more time. I'm getting more headspace. I'm getting more capacity to pour into other things. And I think that's such a beautiful and more helpful perspective, at least that I found, is like, it's a joy and it's an honor to miss out. And I think when you frame it in that way for your mind, it not only gives permission, but it also reframes the way in which you approach saying no's. And it doesn't feel like so defiant, but rather like, it's such a blessing, and you get to communicate that of like, it's such an honor that I would love to do this thing, but I'm actually going to invest my energy into this other thing and pour into that.
Yeah, that's so good. I feel like that's something I do honestly a little too well. But that's also something that I've had to learn through the years. And I want to share like a very tangible example with that, like a story from my life within the past couple weeks. I believe, I mean, it doesn't really matter the time frame, but it was like within the past month or so. And a couple of my girlfriends were going to a new restaurant in Hollywood. And I wanted to go. Like, I wanted to be there more than anything, because I wanted to spend time with my friends. I wanted to try new food. But I just knew, I'm someone who assesses my capacity often. And I knew that the rhythm of my week was not providing space for me to slow down. And so I knew, looking at the rhythm of my week and looking at the demands amongst so many different buckets of my life, that by the time I got to the weekend, I would feel depleted. And that's something that I've learned just as I've learned myself. I've understood my capacity. I've understood my needs. And that's something that I could forecast how I would feel come that Saturday. And so because of that, I withheld my answer and I was transparent of, I have a really busy week. Can I check in on Saturday? And Saturday approached and it came, and I was correct. And I realized, like, as much as my heart would love to be present, I knew my mind just couldn't be. And so the day came and I passed on the opportunity to go to dinner with friends that could have also filled my spirit. But I knew more than anything, if I actually wanted to show up for these friends, I couldn't show up that night because I needed to provide space for me to fill up and for me to choose and decide what I spend my Saturday night doing. And that was a moment where it's like, yeah, I saw the Instagram stories go up. I heard how amazing the meal was, but I chose not to feel like I was missing out on anything, because actually me missing out was me showing up times 10 the next time that I'm, showing up to a girls' night or spending one-on-one time with a friend. And no part of me felt like I was missing out, because in reality, like I said, I was actually showing up through the absence of my presence.
That's so good. And I think something with this, like a language I hear a lot with people talking, if they're like, I don't really want to do this thing, but I feel like I should.
Yeah.
Or I feel like it's expected of me. And something I've really had to work through, honestly, with the Lord is just like, is this something that God is expecting of me? Like something I should honor and serve people in? Or is this something that I'm just doing because I'm afraid people might judge me, or I feel like I'm supposed to do it even though I'm not actually, and it's just something in my mind? And that, I think, has been something that I'm obviously still working through. But I think an example that even came to mind, just because we're in such a season of people getting married, which love that season of life, love walking with people in that and praying over them and being so involved in that. But we naturally, I think so many people get invited to a lot of weddings, and we've actually said no to more weddings than we have said yes. And I think people, it even can be jarring because some of them have been local weddings and we're not out of town, and technically we could go, but honestly, it's one of those things of just truly understanding that an invitation is an invitation. It's not an expectation.
That's so good.
So we have to still discern and say, just because my calendar says I'm free doesn't mean that this is the best thing that I should pour into. And even in that example, it might actually mean that I'm pouring into those people and using that bandwidth in a different way, in a one-on-one way, or celebrating them in a different kind of moment. And that's something where it's even for me, the friction of I'm such a people pleaser and I want to just say yes to everything. But even in big moments, I just have to be so reflective and so intentional and honestly understand the weight and the gravity of what each yes means. And so with all of that, I really hope that as you guys think of what's the thing you can quit or remove or even just say no to, I think sometimes it can just be through almost a selfish lens of well, you have to protect your peace and do all of these things, which I do think you have to do. But I actually think when we frame it of it goes beyond me and it's actually how I can serve and love people in the best way, I think that provides at least for me so much peace in that.
So for our second encouragement in your pursuit of stillness is truly just to get out in nature and to spend time just so submersed, unplugged. And I know that this is something that we don't always feel is accessible to us. Maybe we don't have time to take a trip. Maybe we don't have time to do this grand thing, but truly nature is accessible to likely all of us in some shape, form, capacity, whether it's going out in your backyard, whether it's going on a walk, or whether it is taking a weekend away to just get away from wherever you may live. I think any sort of capacity that you can show up in nature will truly rejuvenate your soul in a way that I think we always forget. I have moments where, and I think it's just my humanness, in the midst of being so busy, I'm not really spending intentional time in nature. Sure, I'm going on my walks. Sure, I'm getting outside, but I'm not like present with my surroundings. And I actually had a moment this weekend where I did do a little getaway weekend and I went to Big Bear. And that was like, of course, a circumstance where I had a free weekend. I was able and capable to drive and like go into the mountains. But while I was submersed in nature, so unplugged from my phone, not paying attention, and really like taking in the trees, taking in the fresh air, just no thought in the world, no to-do list in my mind, no obligation of any sort, just me fixated on the mountains and fixated on the steps before me on this hike. I realized, whoa, I have been carrying so much tension in my body, so much like never ceasing thoughts in my head that preoccupy my mind, even if I'm sitting on the couch or even if I'm going on a walk. But the moment that I'm really present with nature and give myself permission to not think for a moment of all the obligations that I have in this world, the rest that it brings is so restorative. And I think after that weekend, coming back on Monday and realizing or remembering my to-do list, remembering the things that I need to accomplish this week, suddenly I could feel the returning of just like tension in my chest and in my body and stress preoccupying my mind. And that for me almost showed just how drastically time in nature really is so restorative. And like I said, it doesn't have to be a grand getaway. It doesn't have to be an extensive weekend. It can be an extensive 20 minutes outside where you're so intentional of like, okay, I'm going to intentionally fixate my eyes on the trees around me or the grass beneath my feet or the flowers or wherever you live. I'm going to be intentional with observing, absorbing, and literally thinking of nothing else but nature. And I mean, people say step outside and ground yourself for a reason, because there's nothing like being in nature that will really like recenter and realign your heart and your spirit.
Yeah. And I love that you said it can just be like so accessible. I think of like, if you're on your lunch break, like just take your food outside. And honestly, I think something I've noticed, like when I check in on the world around me, like when I think specifically of like nature, I check in on my mind and like how I'm operating and how my nervous system and body is. And so I think it's such a healing thing and something that's so necessary of like, there will be things that are dormant for so long. And then I'll go outside, look at the sky for 5 minutes, and I have all of this like clarity and reprioritization. And I'm like, oh my gosh, all I needed to do was just like check in on the world and like the pace of the world around me, like the pace of nature. And then I see like what the pace in which I need to operate in. So I think that's so powerful. Okay, so my third practical way to slow down, brace yourself, because this is kind of a funny one. When I first heard this, I was a little bit like, okay, like almost wanted to eye roll a little bit, but it is driving the speed limit. And I was listening to a sermon by John Mark Comer, was doing a sermon about the importance of stillness and kind of slowing down. And one of the points he made of something he actively chooses to do every single day is drive the speed limit, which in Los Angeles, I was like, is that even safe?
Do people even do that?
I'm like, am I even allowed to do that? Like, I just feel like the pace in which you have to operate on the freeway is higher than that. And I think for him specifically, it was like, he can't go above maybe like 5 miles per hour or whatever you set your limit to be, whatever you decide is safe. And I think the reason why that stuck with me, and I think why I kept like marinating on it, is because I noticed that was just one of the ways in which we are just expediting and rushing everything in our life. And it's really one of those things where I'm like, what if I actually just left the house a minute or two earlier so that I didn't feel rushed every time I was going places? Like, what if I just set my alarm 2 minutes sooner so that I could get out of the house quicker and I could actually just have a drive in which I didn't feel so rushed and I didn't feel so frantic and reactive? And it was interesting because I heard that sermon that stuck with me. And then a big part of like what this episode was inspired by was a book I'm reading called In Praise of Slowness by Carl Honor. And there was a quote in there and they were talking about like specifically driving. And I'm like, okay, maybe this is a thing. And it said, once you start asking questions about speed, then you start asking the same questions about life in general. Why am I in such a hurry? What is the point of rushing just to save a minute or two? When you're a calmer driver, you're calmer with your family, your work, with everything. And again, I think that's so funny of like being a calmer, slower driver, but it really is just one of the many, many ways. Like go beyond, maybe you don't even drive to get to your work or to get places. Like even just the way in which we walk or operate or make food or clean our house, like when we're just rushing through everything, that becomes the pace and the undertone and undercurrent of everything else that we approach in our life. And suddenly we're rushing conversations with our kids, with our friends, like we're impatient waiting in line at a restaurant. We're frantically flipping through our phone when we like have moments to be in line where we could just like sit and exist. And I thought that was just really neat because it's made me question like, why am I rushing? And why am I always feeling like I'm a little bit behind? And why is that the pace in which I've accepted? And so this point beyond speed limit or beyond driving or anything like that is really just being so intentional with the pace in which you're setting in your day-to-day, just habits of your life, because I really believe that will carry over into the way in which you let your mind run, how quickly it's running. You just let everything else in your life, like that pace and the tone that carries through. So I hope this just gets you to, I guess, kind of like curb the instinct to accelerate everything in your life.
Yeah.
And that you actually realize, oh, if I don't rush things, things still get done. Everything's okay. The world goes on. And I actually feel so much more peaceful.
So our fourth encouragement in slowing down is to not fill every single moment of your day with something. And oh my gosh, am I like the most guilty person ever of this? In the sense that I think I more so personally can have a tendency to want to always be productive or to want to always like do something that feels productive or even be stimulating my mind, whether it's with music or whether it's with social media or whether it's with editing or, journaling even sometimes. Like there's so many things that the moment I have a free space in my calendar or in my day, I'm like immediately turning to how can I just fill my time with something that will get me ahead? Mm-hmm. And the detriment of that thinking is so grand, and it literally leads to the whole thing that we entered this whole conversation with of how much I've seen my capacity has been worn thin and how much I feel like I don't have time in my own hands. But that's because any time that I am given in my own hands, I'm using it to outsource to something else. Like I'm using it to be productive. I'm using it to scroll on Instagram. I'm using it to, say yes to a plan that I don't really actually want to show up for. And that is the key reminder that we want to share over this specific point is that not every single token of your time needs to be filled with something. And even going back to what we were talking about earlier, just because you have a free day in your calendar doesn't mean you have to give it away to seeing somebody else. Doesn't mean you have to give it away to being productive in some sort of way or getting ahead of your to-do list. Just because the time is available doesn't mean it has to be filled with anything. And that is such a hard countercultural, counter-world concept and something that I know I probably struggle with the most out of this entirety list and this entire encouragement. But it's so necessary to give yourself permission of like, you can be a human and not have to be getting something done, not have to be productive, not have to be efficient. We are not created for those things at any given time. And I think one of the hardest concepts for me, as I just mentioned, or something that I've had to learn is that just because I have a full week of, let's say my evenings are free, doesn't mean I have to start slotting in time with friends or this social event or this thing to get done. Like my evenings can be free and they can remain free to my discretion of what I want to do with my time. And that is just such a, like, it's a concept that honestly even brings me tension talking about it, because I think I feel my own personal conviction of how much I struggle with that. But also just in general, like how much we're always looking to fill our time with something. Like when we're at a stoplight, why is it sometimes our instinct to pull up our phone and check social media? What are we doing? Like why can't we have a moment of stillness? Why is it when we're waiting in line somewhere, we're waiting for a coffee, our instinct is to reply to text? Why is it our instinct to get on social media? Why can't we just go on a walk and not do any of those things? Why can't we wait in line and not be trying to fill the space? What if we just stood there? Mm-hmm. What if we just looked at the red light? What if we just let our evening... What if we told people, no, I don't have time this week, and every single evening was free? Like, what would our life look like if we gave ourselves permission to not just fill the space and time just because we can? And that is like really, really, really hard to learn. And it's something that takes practice. And there's times that I have to consciously think of that. Like I will be in line, you know, checking out somewhere, and I'll immediately go on my phone, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, please, by all means, give yourself permission to be a human and do that as well. But if we're constantly infiltrating our mind with something, it's going to lead us to have a restless mind. Like if you're, even if you think, oh, no big deal, I'm just standing in line, checking out at the grocery store, and I'm just opening up social media, you don't realize what it's doing to your brain. It's just stimulating your brain all the more in a moment that could just be a silent moment, literally a beat of rest before you walk up to the register. Like the difference it makes is honestly more grand than you think. And I know I can feel it when I actually practice this in my life. And so I encourage you guys, what is one habit you're reaching for this week, or just in your life in general, whether it is scrolling mindlessly, whether it's filling your week with endless plans? What is one thing you can, going back to even point one, subtract and just be present with and not fill just to fill?
Yeah. That is so good. And that I was like laughing as you were describing that, because something I've been doing more recently is I will just be in public and like turn my phone off, or I'll like bring a book. If I'm going to be at a doctor's office and I'm like, okay, I'm going to wait. Like I have this book, it's optional. But I noticed like I've been doing a lot of sitting in public, and I'm just sitting there, and like, it's so funny because I am making so much eye contact with people. Sometimes it's like too much eye contact awkward. And I like start to get uncomfortable, and I almost feel like people are like, do you need help with anything? Like, are you good? And I'm like, I'm just existing. Like all is well. But it is so funny because there is something I think like maybe, and I'll just briefly touch on like a step beyond this, as I've started to just like embrace the stillness and I don't have my AirPods in all the time. I'm not listening to podcasts. I'm not on my phone. There's this extra space, and it actually has afforded new space for interruption. And I think when we talk about like the art of slowing down and savoring, there's actually a beauty to interruption. And what I mean by that is like, I think of the very practical sense of like, even just being an interruptible person. If somebody can come up to me, I'm the only person a lot of times in places that's making eye contact, that's just existing. And so somebody, if they need help, they can come up and ask me. If they want to talk to me, they're welcome to do that. Like it provides space for unexpectedness and like spontaneity. And I've realized there's something like really sweet and special about that. So take with that what you will, but something just kind of fun. You begin to see these new fruits of like, I've even just noticed I've had like I'm meeting new people, and we're just like, people are like, oh, what book is that? And like, it's just sparked this new, like these little moments that I get to savor throughout the day. And I don't feel like that's an interruption. I feel like that is an opportunity for something new. And especially like faith-wise, it's such an opportunity to like love and see people and make them feel seen and like compliment people and smile at them. Okay, the last and final one, number 5, is to own less and minimize. And when I say that, I even want to go beyond the physical sense, which I do think can be really impactful, but even just in a mental sense as well. I feel like being in a very like consumer focused culture, which not hating on that, but I just do notice I'm constantly being like infiltrated with like, you need more. And like, if you have more, your life will be better. Like so much of what we hear, so much of what we see is like, more is better. And I think I just want to fight back on that a little bit. Not to say you can't own things, but I just don't want us to always feel like having more is better, because I think we start to embrace that in our schedule, and we start to embrace that in our mind of like, knowing all of these people is better, like having access to all of these things is better, having like a full home is better. And at least for me, like the more you have, the more you have to manage, and it starts to become like an obligation rather than just like an opportunity. And so I just want, maybe if that's something you never heard before, like I know for me, I went on a bit of like a rabbit hole this year. Like I was interested in the idea of minimalism and like why people practice it. And I found a lot of like beauty in that. And so if that's something you guys are interested in, of like, you just feel so overwhelmed. Like for me, I was feeling so overwhelmed in my home of just like, I'm managing so much all the time. I found that like minimizing whatever that looks like for you really has like provided less decisions. So like less decision fatigue for me, but also just the concept of like, I don't need more. I don't need a busier summer. I don't need more trips. I don't need more people in my life. Like I don't need more in work. Like I have enough. And I think that's been really freeing to like even physical belongings. Like I have more than I need. Like that is such a blessing. And I realize how like fortunate I am to say that. But just something that I hope can maybe spark a sense of freedom of maybe if you've never considered that, like, oh, wow, I don't need all of those things. And like, maybe that is occupying like mental space.
Yeah. And I think even with that, like the more that we place our worth in having more, the more that we want more.
Yeah.
And then we're like in this endless cycle of like never feeling satiated or never feeling successful or never feeling proud of ourselves because we didn't do enough or we don't have enough or we're not making enough money. And those things like, and it's not, the concept isn't about necessarily the clothes that you have in your closet or the things you have in your home or the money you have in the bank, because those things aren't inherently bad. But I think when we fixate too much of ourselves, our minds, our desires on this earth of having more, you will literally fall so short every single time, because the more will never be enough. And just to what Marissa said, you know, what if we focused more on having less, you know, less time giving it away to things that we don't want to do, less time that we're trying to decide between 1,000 friends and more time investing into a couple. Like, what would it look like to minimize certain things in our life to remove that decision fatigue in our life? And to invite just more rest and stillness in our own minds, because the more we have of anything, given if it's a beautiful, beautiful gift, the more opportunity there is for us to grow weary and to grow thin and to feel like we can't make up our minds, or to feel like we're always longing for more, to feel like we're insufficient and falling short. And so there's multiple like layers that you can really take that concept and run with it. Like I said, whether it is with your tangible possessions, whether it is with your friendships, whether it is with what is your quantity of success, how are you measuring yourself in this world? Do you think it's by doing more? Hey, it probably shouldn't be, because you're always going to fall short if that's your metric. Like I said, this can be applied to any area of your life, but just reminding yourself, truly, like what we always hear, it's not about quantity, it's about the quality. And so what quality are you clinging to and choosing to have in your life? The quality of your yes, the quality of your friendships, the quality of the amount of possessions that you are willing to have in your home. That is what is important versus the quantity of anything.
Okay, so to conclude this conversation, we just wanted to read a psalm over us all, because this is a psalm that I always come to when stillness at times can feel hard. And I think sometimes it can feel like I don't even fully know, like as we're sharing all of these things, I'm trying to implement these practical moments, and yet I still feel like a heaviness. And I think this verse has just been one that I always turn to, and I just like am able to set my sight on God and just allow him to refresh me. So it's Psalm 23, and it reads, "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake." And I just love this verse so much. And there was actually a moment, I think it was a few weeks back, I was going on a hike that was near my house, and it was like I was one of the only people on the trail. I was there with my friend, and it was an early morning, so like the layer of fog was just coming up through the fields, and there was actually this deer that was passing by us, and it just stopped and looked at us, and then it just started to do like this little like leap. Like I can't even explain it. It almost felt like a dance of like it just felt so at peace, and it was such stillness, and like we were so in harmony with nature. It didn't feel like a disruption. We didn't scare it away. It noticed us like we noticed it, and it just like was led into this moment of dance. And then I think it went off to this like water stream, and it just immediately made me think of Psalm 23. And I was like, when we get to a place in which we can just slow down, not only do we feel like we are brought to a place of rest and peace, but kind of like that deer, it then allows us to like truly dance and delight and savor. And so I think that's like my greatest hope with this conversation is not only do you just feel more at rest and like your nervous system can decompress, and that these are tools for that, but that ultimately you can be led to a place where you can just delight and you can savor and you can be so present and you can just enjoy all of the beauty in your life that's around you and enjoy the people. And so that is just our prayer and our greatest hope for you guys with this conversation. And we just hope it just provided such a sense of peace and just restoration and delight in your week. So for this week's Love Notes, as I was reflecting on slowing down and savoring, immediately what came to mind was actually anytime I've been in Europe for like extended periods of time, and I've just been so immersed by their culture and way of life. And so I just wanted to share like a few things that I feel like we can embrace and just learn from like European culture. I feel like they do slowing down and savoring so well. It is remarkable. And so I don't know if you have anything. I know Brie loves Europe and she's done like lots of adventures there, of anything you've learned from them.
I think as a coffee lover, something that I remember more so, I mean, given like modern cities in Europe are very similar to the US, but more so when you like quest out into like more desolate and small towns in Europe or rural areas, I remember like almost feeling so embarrassed when I would go to a coffee shop and be like, "Can I get that to go?" And they would be like,
I didn't even think of that. Wow.
They would literally be like, "No, you can't. Like, you have to drink it here." And that was like a moment that I was like, wait, we in America, and more so just the concept in general, it's not an America versus Europe thing at all, but we do have a tendency to prioritize rushing and like go-getter culture. Whereas in Europe, specifically in that instance, I was like, they don't even know or have ever had to-go cups in this coffee shop because to-go is not a concept. Why are we always trying to get somewhere? Like, why don't we sit down, enjoy what we came here for, and then go onward? And make the time to enjoy the things that we're on our way to do or get or whatever it may be. And that was the moment that I was like, wow, I want to have that mentality always. I don't. I definitely don't.
It's hard.
But that was something that I was like, that's really was just eye-opening for me.
That reminds me of like when I'll go to a restaurant and like a few things. Number one, restaurants stay out. Like people will go to restaurants in the evening and they will just stay there for hours.
Yeah.
And it is so hard. I remember my mom and I went to Milan for like a month or two. And we would like be so exhausted after such a long day and we just wanted to get our food and go. And we would sit down and we could not get the food quick enough and we couldn't get the waiter to bring us our check. Like we would ask for the check by the end of the trip. This is so bad. We would ask for the check like the moment they would bring the
Oh
food.
my gosh.
Because we knew like once everything got wrapped up, then we would be done eating and it would work out perfectly. Which granted, that was like, I was there working and stuff, so it was busy, but I'm like, wow, that is just such a different way of life. And I just loved that they did that. I think food's such a beautiful depiction of that. I also think of like when I was working there and how I just remember like here when I was working, it's like, or even you see with jobs, it's like so normal to start at like 8, maybe 9 if you're crazy.
Yeah.
And my like call times there would be like 9:30, 10 a.m. And I'm like, that's like half the day is gone. Like 10 a.m., 10:30, what is happening? And I would always be like the first one to get there and people would roll in and they would take their bike to work. They'd take their Vespa. They would be relaxed. Like they weren't in a rush to like start. They would go off and have like their little like coffee smoke breaks throughout the workday. And it was just such a different pace. And I was like, wow, they really prioritize like quality of life and pleasure. And I thought that was just such a beautiful way of like, I don't know. I think obviously that feels like a total difference in like work culture, but I think there are little moments that we can embrace, whether it's like not getting your coffee to go or like sitting with friends for like 3 hours at a meal and just like savoring every little moment. I think there's so much opportunity for like just little pleasures and just delights throughout your day.
Yeah, that's so true. And it also, I think, like even something that's so silly is how in America sometimes we can have a tendency to eat faster, because I think our bodies and our minds are trained to just be like on the go, efficient. We're just getting it done.
Efficiency above all else.
Efficiency. Yes. Like we're just eating, we're in and out of a restaurant, hour max, like gotta go, you know? And an hour is a long time, okay? It's a long time. But I think too, like something I remember even thinking, going back to the coffee shop example, is I remember when I was in Europe, it was a couple years back, this specific trip or instance that I'm thinking of, but I remember I like had met someone and I was talking and I was like, I can't wait to drink coffee tomorrow morning. That's just me, as I always am. And I remember this guy, he was a local Italian, and he told me, he was like, oh, well, do you have coffee like at your Airbnb? And I was like, no. And he's like, well, tomorrow's Tuesday and you know every single coffee shop's gonna be closed tomorrow. And the panic I felt in my body, I was like, what do you mean? It's Tuesday. Why would it, or like it was like Tuesday or Wednesday or something like that. I was like, why would things be closed? He was like, because a lot of businesses prioritize like closing midweek in order to have their employees rest.
What a concept.
And I was like, but where am I going to get coffee? That was where the panic settled in. But I think that's more so than the concept of like work culture. It's the concept of, are you giving yourself opportunity to rest and recharge in some sort of capacity, middle of the week or middle of the day, whatever it is? Yeah, it was just like such a new concept, because here in America, it's like things are closed on maybe Sunday, but they're typically open.
That's so weird.
I know, they're like
Unless
open.
you're Chick-fil-A.
That's your Chick-fil-A. Things are open 24/7. 24/7? That's insane.
That's crazy. Oh my gosh. It's so true. But truly, I think when I am like, what do I want my life to look like in 5 years? I want to be like those people that are sitting in coffee shops, no rush, long time at a restaurant, like staying out late on a work night, just like delighting and not just like truly not rushing through life. Like I want to be living.
Yeah.
I truly want to be like not just feeling like the years are passing by so quickly. So I know that was like a little lighthearted perspective, but I just think they do it so well. If you need like some inspiration, I think that's such a fun, like creative place to look. But as always, hope that this conversation was such a blessing for you guys, and we will see you in our next one. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thank you so much for listening. We pray this episode was encouraging and life-giving. If you found it valuable, please share it with a friend, leave a review, and subscribe.
And be sure to follow us along over on Instagram at With Love Always Podcast. Signing off with all of our love always, Bree
And Marissa.